Welcome back to Account Management Secrets. Today, I'm talking with Gillian Core. She is the Global Chief Customer Officer at 360 Learning, and she has done this before. This is her fourth time building and scaling a post-sales organization at a company that's going through a major growth phase. And today, what I wanted to talk to her about specifically is her executive cadence. So instead of getting into the tactics of running an account management and customer success team, I wanted to understand what is the role of the chief customer officer inside the executive suite. How does she work with the CEO? What is the relationship with the CRO? And what are the issues or different priorities around that? How does she work best with the CFO and gain that person's trust? Those are the kind of questions that we're getting into here today. And Gillian is very direct and upfront, and she's going to tell you exactly what she presents, how she positions retention so that it's not bad news, and also why she operates 3/4 ahead of everyone else in the room. She also makes a really strong case for why and when a company needs a chief customer officer. So really fascinating episode here. Let's get into it with Gillian Core. If you're an account manager, you're the one keeping the business running. You own the client relationships, drive the revenue, and solve the tough problems for your customers. Most companies don't give account managers the training or recognition they deserve. That's what you'll get here on the Account Management Secrets podcast. In this show, we cover exactly what you need to succeed. If that sounds like what you've been looking for, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hey, Gillian, great to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You've got an interesting job title. Your job title is Global Chief Customer Officer at 360 Learning. That's cool. Tell me, what is the global part all about?
Yeah, so the company started in Paris, and the three founders are still a part of the business. And once they saturated the French market, of course, they were looking to expand in North America. So they started that a few years ago. And because most of our growth will probably be coming from North America, it was important to find, somebody in this role that was actually based here. So we've got about half our exec team here and about half of our exec team in Paris.
And at what point in the company's evolution did the chief customer officer role become a thing? So was there a certain event? Did something go on? Like, how big is the company, and when did we decide, we need someone in this seat?
Yeah, a couple of years ago. So right between like 40 and 60 million, they realized having two VPs of each region, things just weren't getting done. We weren't really moving forward with one view of how a customer should be treated. And there was just a lot of difference of opinions between the two roles. And the company was also smaller. So the role of chief customer officer was actually chief revenue officer. So that person had both sales and CS and support. And they realized that we needed to accelerate growth, so need a dedicated CRO in North America. Our CRO is the founder, also sits in Paris, but for the focus to have one system throughout the globe, they wanted to have a chief customer officer to really untangle that, so we could accelerate growth in North America under a CRO.
Okay, cool, great. And you said that happened when you're between 40 to 60 million. What's the rough size of the company right now?
We're right around 75.
Okay. So fairly recently we made that call. Okay.
Yeah, I've been here about a year and a half.
Okay, nice. Yeah, awesome. I'm always curious because I've had a number of people on the show who have the chief customer officer title, and we've had a lot of conversations about, what is the mechanics and how do they run their teams and stuff like that. But since we're here today, I thought we would go in a slightly different direction, if you're cool with that, which is I want to understand more deeply, how does the chief customer officer interact with other people at the executive level? So, the CEO, CRO, CFO, head of product, this kind of thing, because in many ways, the chief customer officer, as far as I conceive it, is sort of a connective tissue role. Someone who is the voice of the customer internally, champions the customer, makes sure we're delivering on our promises, and at the same time then has to engage in what I can imagine are pretty serious negotiations with other team members around making things happen and getting stuff done. And so I would just love to explore with you, what do you think about your role in that context, and in what ways do you actively maintain, or dare I say manage, the relationships that you have with other folks in the C-suite?
hmm Yeah, I mean, they depend on me to know the numbers and know what's happening with our customer base. You mentioned, being the voice of the champion of the customer. So, there's two important things in a B2B SaaS business: that you're hitting your numbers on the sales side and that you don't have a leaky bucket on my side of the house. And we're all, most companies, you're all tied to the same compensation metrics. So just because my title says customers doesn't mean that I don't get impacted when sales misses their numbers, or vice versa. So we are very much so in lockstep on making sure that we don't have a leaky bucket. And to the extent that we do, right, we don't retain 100% of our customers, that I have that incredibly well dialed in. I know why it's happening, I know where it's happening, and I know what we need to do about it. So the team relies on me to have a very firm grasp on understanding those trends, and being able to communicate where I need help and when I need help with each of their teams.
Yeah. Okay. And are you reporting typically net revenue retention, gross retention, profit margin by customer? What are the
Mhm.
things that are most that get the most attention?
The most critical thing is the retention rate. So, we're looking at GRR and NRR as a company. And certainly that helps us. I'm presenting those numbers to the board. But when I'm with my team and we're internal, we're looking at retention rate, because that gives us a true read on what are the actions we're taking and what is the impact. Gross retention hides that a bit, right? It pulls your 12 months along. So it might take too long to recognize that there's something that's happening that needs attention. It adds an
Okay.
extra layer of protection. So it's very important to me, that I'm communicating, hey, right now in this quarter, this is what's happening. Because even that is a little bit of, I call myself kind of like an archaeologist. I'm looking at old information by the time it's happening. And so it's good to know, but that's it. It's good to know, right? What we're really talking about when we're in meetings is I'm looking at, today's Q1. So I'm talking about Q4. All I'm talking about is Q4, 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 the future Q4. And all sales is talking about is the number that they're going to hit in Q1. But if I'm spending my time talking about Q1, I'm reading, yesterday's news. So it's really critical that I'm, 3 quarters ahead for the organization.
Oh, that's cool. All right. So essentially, in some ways, you're operating on different timelines from others. So it's not. It sounds like much more long term in your wording, at least, much more long term. You're trying to look ahead because, as you're saying, some of the things that you otherwise might have been tracking are essentially lagging indicators, and you're trying to get ahead of the leading indicators to get a sense of how close are we going to be to our renewal number come December.
Right. And if we do something today, what's it going to impact? It's going to impact Q4, maybe even at this point, Q1 of next year. So if I'm asking for things, that's where we need to look at impact. But if I'm talking to, the CFO, or if I'm talking to the board, um, adding more metrics under there. You kind of mentioned like subscription margin or customer acquisition cost or the rule of 40. Those are the things I'm looking at when we're speaking with the board, because those are also top line health metrics.
Now, you joined, you said about a year and a half ago. You previously had been in customer success roles. You were at Placer AI, you're at rep.com, reputation.com, in senior customer success roles. And it looks like you started out in marketing agencies and in account director type roles as well. So you've seen a lot of different sides to this role here. To what extent did you find yourself having to educate the rest of the executive team about what a chief customer officer actually does? Like, was the job description that was posted, or the thing that you interviewed for, was that actually what wound up becoming the role, or were you changing along the way and educating people, informing them, and really shaping that role since you came on board?
Yeah, I think here, the one thing that we've shaped is not necessarily the role, but the accountability that the role contains, and driving the concept of putting our customers first. right? Every region handles their customer base a little differently, and each region behaves a little differently. So the North American market is just more demanding. If you think about opening up a support ticket or having live interactions with an agent, things like that, and just the lag time in Europe that they kind of accept in customer responsiveness. So a lot of my education has been more just watch what I do, not what I say. So me putting my cell phone in my email, me jumping on chats, me calling the top 10 customers the first week I'm here, just making myself accessible to customers was something very, very different for this company. And part of that's because we are B2B SaaS, we are a software. A lot of our customers would prefer to do chat or ticket. They don't always want to talk. We don't have, in the old days, you had somebody's phone number. Now you're lucky if you even know where they're based. Just because a company's headquartered somewhere doesn't mean your customer is there, right? So a lot of times we don't know where our customers are or kind of what their phone numbers are. So I think a lot of those actions just really informed the exec team that I see my role as being accessible to customers, and not just saying that we're the voice of the customer, but a great day for me is at least 10 customer calls a day where I'm just listening, because that gives me a pulse of what's actually going on. Yeah. It's a lot because I have great leadership. So, they know what needs to be done. They have the processes and the infrastructure to answer customer demand. And so I'm talking to our top customers and I'm listening to trends on the ground of some of our smaller ones.
Okay, cool. Great. I mean, look, that is the way to stay abreast of what's going on within the customer base. So that makes perfect sense. Tell me, Gillian, a little bit about the relationship with the chief revenue officer. So I've got some hypotheses around how this works. I've got some ideas around what direction the world is moving in. Essentially, one of the things that I know one of the things I believe that happens is you've got potentially the perception of competing priorities. So not necessarily competing priorities, but the perception of competing priorities. And if we put revenue in someone's job title, but we only give them the 27 or 30% of revenue that actually comes from new business every year, right? Which we know to be the rough ratio, versus someone else who then has the entirety of the 70% or more that comes from existing customers. Sometimes that can be an issue. Often the CEO doesn't, like I was saying before, maybe it's a new role, so they haven't necessarily scoped out, what belongs where, or which accountabilities are in what spot. But when I've talked to a lot of other chief customer officers, I note that there is this kind of, maybe we don't have the clarity, we don't have the understanding of what those overlaps are. So I'd imagine you spend a lot of time with your CRO counterpart because of handoffs and customers and expectations and all the things that go into running the entirety of the revenue. But I'm curious about your philosophy behind that and what you've learned along the way.
Mm-hmm. So, other than, getting some good boxing matches happening, which I've seen a lot in my past, which makes it very difficult for your teams to get along. So I've definitely had a CCO and a CRO that just were constantly, like you said, battling over resources and priorities and things like that. For the most part, we're church and state. There's a Chinese wall between us, and the intermediary between the two is professional services. So the times where you see a constraint is when you maybe don't have enough support on pre-sale and something is in implementation and there's a strain. And so you're taking resources away from customers to maybe onboard a new customer, or you're using customer resources to sell a deal. So the shiny object always gets the attention. And so you might have very fast internal operations around servicing a new customer, which puts your existing customer at the back of the line. So we try to mitigate that by having just separate teams within professional services that can just have different priorities. The other constraint that you see is what they traditionally call now an account manager. So if you have 100 customer success people, you might have 10 account managers, and their job is to drive upsell. However, you're missing somebody to manage the relationship of the customer. So your customer success partner might have a project manager that they deal with on a daily basis, and then your account manager comes in to sell, but there's no relationship with anybody above the project manager. So the challenges with the CRO and CCO is who owns Upsell and who owns those resources. And are we going to be church and state about that and tell that team, hey, all you need to care about is selling? But the thing that would power selling is if you actually had real relationships and you were a real trusted advisor. So if you took the time as an account manager to build a relationship, be a strategic partner, get wide and deep in relationships, we would obviously sell more things. So that's the biggest hurdle is trying to train a sales team that doing some of the things that they don't see as driving upsell would actually drive, higher customer lifetime value. So those are the typical points of contention.
And how does it break down for you in terms of, is there a separate thing called customer success and then a separate thing called account management? How do you break those down? Who owns what?
Yeah, so we have professional services, which is the intermediary between the two, the technical team, which we try to divide into new business and customers, but there's still resource constraints. And then there's a customer success person who's either assigned or tech touch. And then there's an account manager, and it's, more or less that 100 to 1 kind of, or 100 to 10 ratio. But, and that account manager is assigned with the upsell.
And that account manager works for the CRO,
The
or works for you?
CRO, right?
Works
Because
for
the
the
belief
CRO.
is, they have some proprietary selling methodology that kind of we wouldn't understand. The argument is if you had all of the customer services under one hood, could you service them better because you're aligned more on larger strategic initiatives rather than just upsell revenue?
Yeah, no, fair question. And so just to clarify, both you and the CRO report to the CEO, is that correct? Okay, got it. Because one of the things I've been playing around with was, what if the CRO actually were a 100% like full spectrum chief revenue officer, and the chief customer officer was actually then became something called the SVP of growth or something along those lines. So you then had CRO owns the whole number. You've got a growth component, which is 70+% of revenue. And then you've got a new business component, who's the VP of sales, rolling up to the CRO. That's, in my mind, a fairly elegant design. How do you react to that?
Well, then you eliminate the role of the CCO.
Yeah.
So if you're in a SaaS business where the lifeline of the business is your customers, the CRO by default is going to focus on the shiny object. I have yet to meet a CRO that has any background in actually servicing a customer or the technical know-how to get it done or the patience or the attention to detail to do the role. Obviously, I'm very partial because that's my whole bread and butter. But CROs are, the typical, they're the sales guys, they're the schmoozy, we'll figure it out later, sign here. And that's not going to work on the customer side of the house. They're too ingrained and too knowledgeable at that point to be satiated with those kinds of answers. So challenging to have a CRO focus on both things. I think, you kind of risk your customer satisfaction at the end of the day. But
A previous guest on this show, Craig Rosenberg, described it as, I remember him saying that the CROs are the people who break down walls to go save a quarter. And so it's definitely a different mindset. My thought is, if the end goal is that we want to build a durable compounding revenue engine that has as much predictability as possible in it, so as few surprises in it, that we want to consolidate the resources into a single team. Now, it does vastly expand the scope of CRO beyond the capabilities of a lot of current CROs, right? So that's totally understood, and it takes a different mindset and a different breed. I just wonder if that's the direction that we're kind of generally speaking going in.
yeah,
Tell me about.
I mean, it's where we were. You know what I mean? So when I came in, that's what
Yeah.
was, and we purposely broke that apart and said we need something different. So I think it depends on the size of the company and what you're trying to accomplish, right? If we're going to have triple digit growth and conquer North America, we need somebody that's done it before and that is 100% focused on that, because there is a 24-month timeline to get that done. So for where we are right now, I can't imagine that person then also inheriting all of the, things that I'm handling. So I think it's the right fit for us now. Maybe once we become more mature and we've hit that growth target in North America, it's something that could be taken over time.
Now, tell me about the relationship with the CFO. One of my thoughts here is that the CFO should be the best friend of the account management team and the customer success team, because the CFO understands, the ups and downs of revenue. They understand compounding. They understand the leaky bucket. They understand all the contributions that this team makes. What do you find in terms of your relationship with the CFO and the finance team in general?
Yeah. So this is my fourth time kind of doing the same thing, where I'm taking a company that's typically from 100 million to 250 million and exiting. So it's my fourth time. So my relationship with the CFO is always foundation of the existing team, how to make sure that we scale without ballooning the size of the team as we hit those targets. And so I'm always looking at subscription margin and the breakdowns there. And then I'm typically working with the accounting firms that they bring in to justify the cost of people, and how we can manage to keep that under control as we grow. So, my job is always to make sure that whatever customer orders fries, that the fries are exactly, how they should be, and McDonald's level quality, no matter which person they're interacting with or which product they bought. And so I've got to make sure those processes are, and the hiring and all of that is very well buttoned up, able to explain to an accountant, hits the rule of 40, and keeps people happy and retained in the business, because turnover could kill customer stability.
Do you find that NRR, net revenue retention, is truly something that is, in the top 3 metrics that the CFO cares about? And I'm asking that because, it's like I've seen that platitude, and then people are like, oh, it's a whole company metric. And I just want to know, like, is it actually like that, or is it still farther down the list?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's NRR and subscription margin. And as long as we're hitting on those two things, then the CFO is more than happy. And as long as I can explain it and justify our structure to an accounting firm as we look for either more money or an exit, then they're very tickled. That's a metric that your investors understand, and that's a metric that they depend on, and a formula that they're familiar with. So when you start to, the rule of 40 has really grown in popularity, and we're certainly watching that. It's cash flow positive, NRR, the rule of 40, and subscription margin over and over and over and over again. Yeah. And I think that's because it's easily translatable, and it makes it an investable business, something that people want to participate in.
And remind me, rule of 40 is growth rate plus operating margin?
So it's your revenue growth percent plus your profit margin greater than 40%.
Okay. All right. So okay. I got it. Okay. So that's and that's kind of the benchmark these days is 40 for a lot of companies in your situation of scaling fast. Mm-hmm. Well, good. I mean, it's good to know that the CFO is an ally, right? That's important because
yes, an ally in those metrics, as long as you're hitting those metrics. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So so not always an ally, but someone who understands the like what's underneath. They understand
Absolutely.
The drivers of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The worst thing you could do is have to then justify and re-explain what are the numbers and that kind of thing. And of course, it's going to be a different conversation if you're below your targets, if you're not doing as well as you're hoping.
Yes. That never happens. So it's always easy.
Let's move the conversation. I want to talk about one of the big issues that I know a lot of leaders in post-sales have, which is elevating how your team is perceived across the rest of the organization. Because we all know that there's this issue that the CCO's role is kind of a black box, post-sale. People don't really fully understand all the moving parts, what goes into it, the amount of effort that goes into it. And as a leader, a big part of what we got to do is, make sure that the rest of the company gets it, right? That this lands with people that they understand. So we're not toiling away in the shadows, but we're actually out there, getting the recognition that we deserve. How do you think about that with your teams? And what are the things that you do to raise the profile of your leaders and the rest of your teams for the company?
Mm-hmm. The number one thing I talk about, so, the trap for the CCO is to always be the bearer of bad news, right? The CRO comes in and goes, we did it again. We hit our number. And I come in and I go, we did it again. We didn't lose as badly, right? Because my number by nature is a little bit of a negative number, right? So I never say the C word. I always talk about retention. It's always about how much are we retaining. I never talk about the other side. Um, Obviously, it's the inverse and people can figure it out. But just that little perception goes a long way with your peers because it weighs on people if you're always talking about the other side. The other thing I do is the first number I always present is the save ARR. So every week it's, this week, this month, this quarter, we've saved XYZ euros. This is our saved ARR. And that takes everybody. It's not just people that are under my particular realm. There are a lot of people in the organization that touch that. I think those are the main tricks that tricks, those are the positioning things that I use. And yes, there is a perception that, kind of what are they doing? So when COVID happened, we had a call every morning at 8 a.m. and I had to stack rank every single person every day. And every day I would go, well, it hasn't changed from yesterday, but it was constant. What are these people doing? Right? Like, how could they possibly be working? It's COVID, and so there is a tremendous amount of pressure all the time to justify exactly where their time is spent. But I like to flip that and say, what are our customers trying to achieve? Are they able to achieve it? Why or why not? And then we look at the thing holistically, because otherwise you get into a trap of what are we going to be doing? Time tracking and task tracking. The ultimate answer is, are our customers able to achieve what they're trying to achieve? Is there something in the product or services that is blocking them? Because where a customer facing person spends their time is being always available when things that are supposed to work don't work. So I like to take it a step back and really see where the actual gap is. So anytime I'm asked about where they're spending their time, I always bring it back to, are our customers achieving what they're trying to achieve?
And at the end of the day, net NRR is a good proxy for that, because
Absolutely.
we know the people who they meet their goals, then guess what? They're going to stay with us. Therefore, our retention rate is going to be high, or churn rate is going to be low, to use your example. And by the way, they're going to expand, which puts our NRR above 100%. And so that's why it's been gaining in popularity. Now, when it comes to the literally the meetings, the executive meetings and stuff like this to talk about this, I've sat in these, our listeners have sat in these. These meetings we've got this weekly executive team meeting, and we spend 75% of the time on pipeline, and everyone's talking about down to the minute detail of, is this thing confirmed? Is it going to close? What's the da-da-da? And we have spent all the time on that. And then, you're lucky if you get 15 minutes at the end where they're like, oh yeah, and existing customers, is everything okay there? Any fires? Which, in my mind is really kind of backwards. But question for you is, how do you approach those situations in meetings? So how do you make sure that your CEO, CFO, heads of the company are getting everything that they need, but we're not giving them more information than they can absorb in any one meeting? We're just getting to, hey, here's what's going on, here's the priorities, that kind of thing. So what's your, I guess I want to call it reporting cadence, if you will, with the exec team?
Yeah, we do the weekly hoo-ha, and we do two of them. So
Okay.
we do one that's focused on topics, right? If we're launching a new product, a new partnership, or there's a particular topic that we need to discuss as an executive team. And then we do what you're calling, which is kind of the company number readout. And, this company, that 360 Learning, we are async, and we believe in a culture, we call it convexity. So everything for us is in writing. When I think about Amazon and Jeff Bezos kind of writing everything in a Word document, no PowerPoint slides, everything's read in advance. So we don't do a lot of top-down presentations. We really rely on people to read the numbers and ask questions. And we do that, all of that async. So those weekly calls for me are really just operations and finance verifying the numbers that they have and any questions that they might have for us. So it's, hey, these are the numbers. I'm hitting them or not. Here's why or why not. I need this from so and so. I need that from you. And then, I mean, it's very short, 5-7 minutes. I think it's really just for operations finance and for us to kind of air any questions if there's something in the numbers that people are questioning.
Okay, cool. So the asynchronous part is a great innovation there. I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, plus with the time zones that you have within the
Yeah.
company. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what are your thoughts about uh, you know, chief customer officer role raising the profile? And what's specifically your advice for someone who is new to this role? So maybe they got promoted from a VP of account management or VP customer success, or maybe they're just coming in to a newly created chief customer role. What's your first 90-day playbook advice for them?
Yeah. I think it's been the same kind of throughout my career. And number one is to know your numbers, know what's going on with the customer base, rock solid. And the only way you can do that is by really spending time in it and really understanding it, because everybody else is counting on you to do that hard work so they don't have to. And there's nothing worse than missing a big underlying trend and having an impact, 18 months from now that you didn't anticipate. Number two, and that requires clean data, great processes, making everyone accountable, making people that report into you that lead teams accountable to running their businesses and knowing their numbers. So it's a whole philosophy and process that's typically very different. Most customer facing people are not, they relied on either finance or operations to care about numbers, or they relied on sales to care about upsell. I flip all that and I say that you're the CEO of your book. You better know what's going on with your customers better than anybody else. The other thing that I've done is, which we talked a little bit about, is just knowing the customers. So to your point, like if we don't really need a CCO, we have a CRO and you have a VP that's running customer whatever, what value do you actually bring if you're not a thought leader and you don't have relationships with your biggest customers? So, launching customer advisory boards, making sure that our strategic customers are actually driving our strategy, having a seat at the table on voice of the customer with product is critical, right? Because the sales list of product wants is going to be very superficial and deal specific, but you're more of an indicator on actual trends over time. So those are three areas, knowing your numbers, making sure people are accountable to those, having very strong executive level relationships with your customer base and your board and your peers. I think those are really critical for the role.
Awesome. And if you were advising a CEO
Mm.
to say, when is the right time to do this? What are the different tests or milestones or markers to know it's time for a chief customer officer?
I think when you have accelerated growth goals, it's time. And once you're stable, for me, that's always been kind of a 50 million marker, is the time that it's needed, because now you've proven viability in the market. And if you spend more, you can accelerate faster in theory. So creating divergence between the CRO and the CCO at that point probably will be the most powerful for you. And there's so much to do when you get to that size, because it's when you're at that size, it's the first time segments start to emerge. Prior to that, whatever, if anybody will buy it, you're like, great, let's keep them, like sell to that person again. But once you get to that size, you start to realize you have to treat customers differently in order to scale. Otherwise, it's cost prohibitive to have customer facing person on every account. And there's actual gains in putting process in place, and being more refined with your product market fit can just open up a world of scaling. That's why I'm in favor of the role, just because of the sheer responsibility that the CRO has, must hit numbers.
So that's a great way to think about it is, am I getting increasing returns from this investment, right? Meaning, is this an actual additive person? Is the business complexity now at a point where it makes sense for us to start treating segments of customers in a different way? And is this then someone who's going to bring a process for the entire team to gel around so that we're all doing the same thing? So if those conditions are met, then it's a good time for a chief customer officer. If not, maybe we're not quite ready yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, Gillian Core, thank you for being here. And thanks for this tour of the very important role of chief customer officer. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Take care.